Okay, so Be'ezras Hashem, we're continuing with our shirim on Rav Tzadok and imagination, and we're in the Sefer Machshavas Charetz. And we've discussed ultimately how the main essential way of being a human being is to be a thinking human being. And the truest nature of thinking is the mid-level point of thought, not the origin of thought, which is the machshava stima'a, thinking without any particular thoughts, nor is it the secondary outgrowth of thought in its wild imaginings, which is thoughts without thinking, but it's the centermost point in which active thought takes shape, where the concepts that I am contemplating have a strength of expression that they descend down beneath the mind and into the feeling heart itself. And in that center point of thinking, where it's a thoughtful thought, where I am contemplating an idea for the sole purpose of allowing it to penetrate into my heart to shift the way that I look at the world, that's the truest nature of thinking. And that true nature of thinking needs to battle sometimes against the dangerous symptoms of thought as it extends itself down, which becomes the mindless ruminations and imaginations that a person develops based on their sensual experience in the world. And left to its own devices, that imaginative edge of thinking draws itself downwards towards the gravitational pull of the animalistic soul, and it can be destructive. And therefore, there is a balance that has to be developed between the essential nature of thought, which is the contemplation of divine ideals for the sake of influencing the emotional and feeling territory of my experience in this world. And it has to always be on guard to protect itself against the natural tendency for the mind to descend down into the ruminations and the imaginations that are rooted in the body. And Rav Tzadok said that ultimately, the main way of being a human being is to contemplate these thoughts. And the main thing that a person should be thinking is thoughts of Emunah, thoughts of the acknowledgement that I am ultimately a limited creature. And by dint of my limitations, I have to assume that only God is whole. And I am endlessly trying to come closer to God, never becoming perfect, never becoming equal on the level of godliness, but rather always and endlessly trying to attach myself by way of chachma to come to deeper and deeper recognitions of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Left to our own devices, God forbid, if thought gets dragged down by the nether territory of ruminations and imaginings, so then the mind begins to forget this most essential secret, which is the imperfection of the self, expressed specifically by way of Emunah. The chiddush of Avram Avinu is that he utilized the mind to reveal one thing and one thing alone, which was the Emunah Kol Zos. That's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu saw in Avram. That's what Hashem loved in Avram. Not Avram's ability to be an intellectual philosopher, not Avram's Avinu's ability to be a financial leader. None of those qualities were what made Avram Avinu unique. What made Avram Avinu unique was his full acceptance of the natural imperfection of the self and the impossibility of absolute closure and the impossibility of the absolute seizure of knowledge of God, which lends the soul only one option, which is the path of faith. The path of faith of Shivisi Hashem Lanagdi Tamid, that I believe in HaKadosh Baruch Hu at each and every moment. Belief necessitates an acknowledgement of deficiency. Left to its own devices, the mind wants to overcome that deficiency. It wants to be whole in and of itself. It wants to transform the notion of God into an idolatrous impulse of something that's measurable and contained, and that can be measured and understood completely. And in that place, the individual forgets about the imperfection, and their imagination lets them feel, God forbid, that they're perfect, which is the root source of all of the problems. And Rav Tzadok expressed to us that the mind, being the central place in which the human being is capable of expressing themselves, and the content of thought, which is thoughts of Emunah, which help the individual perpetually remember our imperfection, not an imperfection by way of a symptom of not being good enough, but an imperfection that's rooted in the fundamental perfection of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and nothing else can be perfect like that, because Kedushasi Lamala Mikdushasechem. So then Rav Tzadok expresses to us the need to uphold the power of thinking. That thought is the center, thought is the engine that enables a person to function in this world, that enables a person to protect themselves against the all too human idolatrous impulse to make ourselves perfect or to believe in perfection in this world other than God, which is the roots of addiction, and it's the roots of anxiety, and it's the roots of thinking that we're in control. So in order to protect ourselves from that all too natural sway into the nether territories of imagination, So we have to actively engage in thinking. That thinking is like the ceiling of the mind that must be stabilized at all times. That the goal of the individual is to choose to activate the chachma shebemoicham, which is the site of the neshama shebelev, where the thought expresses itself down into the feeling heart and it transforms a person's experience. That is a muscle that needs to be worked out each and every day, each and every moment. A person cannot allow the ceiling of their mind to begin to crumble and sag as the result of the laziness of thought. And it's all too human to fall into the tendency of the laziness of thought because, given our own pathways, the mind wants to be dragged down to that which feels most real, and that's this world. It's Alma de Shikra. And in this world, it's a physicalized territory, and that's where imagination is going to seek out its addictive objects that seek to fulfill it. But it's only in the strengthening of thought, ascending up from the lower edge of Dimyon and rooting ourselves in Chachma and remembering that all that exists is HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it enables us to persistently connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And when we connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the right way, says Rav Tzadok, it's not that we're undoing the principle of imagination, because the principle of imagination is fundamental. But the principle of imagination needs to be elevated back up to the true place of insight making, which is Chachma. If my dimyon goes down to the guf and it begins to relate to the guf, then the dimyon is going to conceive of itself as perfect, and it's going to search out perfect pleasures in this world. Then it's going to be a life of addictive ruminations and imaginings about where sustenance can come from. But if we can free ourselves from the danger of that dimyon, unhinged, and we can remember and affirm for ourselves the natural imperfection of the self, not by dint of not being good enough, but by dint of the fact that we are human beings, so then our imagination becomes a vessel that can be elevated back up to Chachma. And not only does it not contradict Chachma, but it becomes the very site of the emergence of new forms of Chachma. Imagination, when utilized properly, enables a person to remember the capacity of meaning making and to develop faithful pathways in this world, of derech emunah bacharti, of perpetually choosing the path of faith, ki mitzvosecha shivisi, because I'm placing your mitzvos in front of me at all times. When we can elevate medama, we can elevate that free associative space in our mind, and we attach it back up to the true source of meaning making, so then the mind becomes the receptacle that allows the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu to be magnified in all sorts of new configurations, in all sorts of new ways, each and every person according to their own conjecture and their own orientation. Every moment that we can imagine ourselves being close to God, of Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, to be Medama, that I'm standing right in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Ki'ilu Omi Lifnei HaMelech, so then each and every person becomes an individualized and singularly unique kaleidoscope of experience that reveals the light of faith in a way that no other person is capable of revealing it. Each and every person's imaginative capacity is a very worthy kli of revealing the light of godliness. But that's only when we work on thinking and we abstract the dimyon from its all too human natural tendency to set down into the addictive tendencies of perfectibility and perfection, and we can abstract it back up like Avram Avinu to that place of Emunah. And Rav Tzadok continued, and he said that we have to strengthen our minds and we have to go through the very real processes that are necessary. And Chazal have given us roadmaps as to how to cultivate healthy thinking and how to elevate our imagination from the destructive place that imagines addictive, satisfactory options in this world, when instead all we need is Emunah. And the Yetzer Hara, which is imagination unhinged, which is the imagination that wants to attach itself down to the bodily instincts and down to the human condition. So we have to get rid of that. We have to realize that the Yetzer Hara and the negative forms of imagination that we have become so accustomed to because we've been left to our own devices are not the true expression of the soul. The true expression of the soul is the Chachma Shebemoyach, is that place of the Bittul Be'etzem, which is that light of Atzilus within the mind that has the capacity of creating more and more meaning, meaning to say that through the mind we have the ability of revealing more and more infinite light in reality. But that's only when we abstract imagination back up to its true source, which is the Yetzer HaTov, and then the Yetzer Hara serves as a vessel that reveals the Yetzer HaTov in more and more vibrancy and more vitality. That's when the imagination is working very well for us. Biyad HaNeviya Madama. But if the Yetzer Hara has entered in already and the Madama has already taken shape and it's found the contours through which it seeks out artificial perfection in this world, So then it takes the work of getting rid of the Yetzer Hara and reorienting ourselves and retrieving the true ownership over Dimyon and realizing that just because my imagination has been so attached to the body for so long, it doesn't mean that it always has to be there. It's not a handmaiden of the body. In truth, it's a handmaiden of the neshama. But because the Dimyon has not been regulated properly, it's become stuck to the body, and we felt that we have to get rid of it instead of elevating it and redeeming it by way of Ruach HaKodesh and Nevuah. So Chazal give us a very clear roadmap that Rav Tzadok describes, which is first and foremost, we have to strengthen ourselves. We have to be willing to make the decision to expel the Yetzer Hara from our minds and to return back to the true place of Dimyon Ha'amiti, which is the ability to live with Emunah. And if that doesn't work for an individual, then the next thing to do is to spend time thinking about God, to study the Torah, to allow the mind to become the receptacle that allows the light of God to descend down in. And if that doesn't work, then a person has to read Kriyat Shema. They have to tap into the light of Ein Od Milvado, to the truest light of imagining Emunah in the most vibrant and potent ways imaginable. And if Kriyat Shema doesn't work, then a person has to remember the day of death, meaning to say they have to remember the transiency of this worldliness and the impossibility of perfection in this world, so as to stun the Yetzer Hara out of its desire to trap us and for it to leave us alone for a moment so that we can abstract ourselves back up to the true place of light, which is the development of meaning and emunah and more light that is cultivated through the mind of the individual themselves. Because for Rav Tzadok, the mind is not the site where the thoughts themselves are generating. Like we said, the source of thinking is the machshava stima'a, which means that it's a thought that's being drawn down from on high. That for Rav Tzadok, to think properly is to witness the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu as it expresses itself within our mind. That the chachma that we're operating with is in truth the chachma of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And that's the chachma that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals within the mind of each and every individual, which is the Adam themselves, which is the koyach of Ma. That the individual themselves is the vehicle and the vessel that allows the thoughts of HaKadosh Baruch Hu Kavyachol to be revealed within the world. And if we're able to abstract our imagination from the all too human egotistical desires and the addictive tendencies of bodily orientation in this world, then we're capable of abstracting imagination back up to the true source of meaning, back to the Chachma, and it begins to serve as the vessel that reveals more and more light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And so we're holding now by Os Zayin in Machshavas Charetz. And Rav Tzadok here is going to really emphasize that it's not such a difficult thing to engage in this process. It's not far from any Jew to take the necessary steps of untethering themselves from the addictive form of imagination that has imagined itself as being able to wrestle perfection from this world or to be perfect, which leads to all of the symptoms and all of the struggles that we encounter, and to abstract imagination back to its true source, which is Chachma, and to allow ourselves to live with the knowledge of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It's not a difficult thing for a person to do. Each and every person has this capacity of attaching themselves to the truth of reality, which is Einoin Milvado. And when I attach myself to the truth of reality, which is Einoin Milvado, then the mind is refined. And that means that I'm going to want to try and do the right thing in this world. I'm going to want to try and attach myself to the truth of reality, which is the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. If a person is unwilling to put in the basic modicum of effort necessary to retrieve their mind back from the nether territories of this worldliness and bring it up back to a place of the freedom of being able to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so Rav Tzadok says that's not the person that the book is talking to. There has to be a modicum of effort. Laziness in thinking is an impossibility. We have to be strong in our thoughts. We have to be mitchazek ourselves and utilize the koyach of the machshava to hold HaKadosh Baruch Hu within our minds. As the Tikkunei Zohar says on the pasuk in Shir Hashirim, Melech Aser Berahatim, that the king is tied up in cords. So Melech the Asur Berihite Moicha. The Tikkunei Zohar says in Tikkun Vav that it's like the king who is tied up within the cords of the mind. That if we strengthen our thoughts and we utilize the true potency that God has given us, which is to be thinking creatures, then the strengthening of the thought and the gathering of the thought and the elevation of imagination back from its Yetzer Hara-oriented space and up to that place that enables light to be redoubled more and more with more intensity through the koyach of the Dimyon. So then in that place, a person has the ability of attaching themselves to the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But if a person is not willing to put in the basic amount of effort, so then the tikkunim come in a different way, and that's not going to be the strength of the mind that holds HaKadosh Baruch Hu in it. So Rav Tzadok is teaching us that it's really very simple. All a person has to do is contemplate the presence of godliness in the morning and at night. We say in Kedusha, Pa'amayim b'chol yom tamid, that we proclaim the unity of HaKadosh Baruch Hu twice a day, always. What that means, and Rav Hutner explains this based on a klal from Rav Tzadok, is that if a person wants to cultivate an awareness of godliness, it doesn't mean that I have to be on at every moment of the day contemplating divine unity. It means that I have to start my day and I have to end my day. I have to bookmark my day. I have to begin with Eino and Milvado, with Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad, and I have to end with Shema Yisrael Hashem Elokeinu Hashem Echad. That is the basic requirement of each and every person to free themselves from that natural tendency of the imagination to descend down to the body and to elevate themselves back up into the space of the neshama. Each and every person has that capacity. Not every person can know the entirety of the Torah. As Rav Tzadok teaches us that to know Torah is a gift from Hashem, and it doesn't say much about a person. And if you're given the gift of a strong mind, then you have the responsibility of trying to be a Talmid Chacham. But the basic modicum of the mitzvah of Talmud Torah is to say Kriyat Shema in the morning and at nighttime, because that is ultimately something that rests within the wheelhouse of each and every Jew. To shock the system, to shock the Yetzer Hara from its natural addiction down below, and to awaken within it this acknowledgement of Ein Oid Milvado, to allow the dimyon to ascend upwards, to engarb chachma rather than engarbing the Yetzer Hara. And once we're able to draw the light of Emunah into our lives, once we're able to illuminate that light of Shema Yisrael in our mind, then chachma is restored. So it's not just that we're no longer stuck in the destructive tendencies of dimyon, but what we're actually doing is we're elevating dimyon now back up to chachma. We're bringing that space of the dangerous territory of imagination, and we're elevating it back up so that it truly becomes a vessel that will not only not be contradictory to chachma, but it will enable chachma and wisdom to express itself in new ways that without imagination would never have been possible. And the place that we see this redemptive quality of imagination, once it's abstracted back from the body up to the mind, is going to be within the utilization of dimyon for Torah, for dreams, for the process of nevuah, the dreams of Yosef HaTzadik, the dreams of Yaakov Avinu. We see that when refined, dimyon itself is not destructive, but rather it's something that must be re-included into the system of Avodas Hashem. Dimyon is the vessel through which the individual is capable of imagining things that are not essentially real or true according to the external determinations of truth or reality, but it's real and it's true in a way of imagination, that the imagination becomes a real thing. It becomes a frame of thinking. It becomes a new levush of the seichel. And in spite of the fact that it might not be evidence-based or rooted in fundamental clarity, the freedom of imagination when elevated up to the neshama is that it's biyad hanaviyah madama. And each and every person has the capacity to develop their own frequency and their own framing of meaning through which the light of Chachma is going to be revealed. To imagine oneself as being very, very close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, to imagine oneself as very happy, to imagine oneself and filled with the awareness of divine presence. These tools of imagination enable us to conjure up frames of thinking that are not necessarily rooted in the evidence-based reality of external thinking or the body. This tool of imagination is the revelation that even within those things that appear to not be fundamentally real or fundamentally true, nevertheless, if they maintain a spark of infinite wisdom within it, that dimyon is mishapich, it's transformed into a real frame of thinking that can provide profound levels of comfort for each and every person. In fact, this is the purpose of creation. HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants to be found within the dimyon of each and every person. The medama has to become a vessel that reveals the light of faith so that each and every person can literally begin to live with the light of Gan Eden in their minds. Dimyon is that lahat ha'cherev ha'mesapeches that can be frightening and it can descend downwards, and it can be what keeps us out of Gan Eden. But when refined and when we're able to ascend close enough to the Madama and realize that it, in fact, is not destructive, it's only when it descends down to the artificial perfectibility of the body that it becomes destructive. So then we can bring the Lahat HaCheref HaMesapeches and the Dimyon back into the territory of Kedusha, and it stops being the thing that blocks us re-entry into Gan Eden, and it starts being the thing that brings us access to Gan Eden. It's only going to be through the zichuch of the Madame that a person can literally begin to live with Oilamecha Tireh B'chayecha, that from within the ha'alama of this world, and from within the concealment of the imaginative principle, a person can begin to draw down the light of La'asid Lavo, the Chaye Oilam, the light of Emunah and Gan Eden, down into the mind, and through Biyad HaNeviya Madame, through the Chalomos of the Tzadikim Ha'amitim, we have the capacity of realizing that the Dimyon can reveal something that even wisdom itself can't reveal. And Rav Tzadok is going to go even further, because in order to show us this place of the redemption of the imagination, he's going to use the dreams of Yosef HaTzadik and the dreams of Yaakov Avinu as a fundamental revelation of this. The fact that even the dreams become part and parcel of the Torah, and even though they're not fundamentally true in accordance to the truth value of, say, Chachma, nevertheless, there's a hidden, latent meaning-making capacity hidden within the Dimyon that offers a different type of truth value. It's not true in the sense that Chachma is true, because Chachma is evidence-based and it's according to the reality of the circumstances. Dimyon is not necessarily in relation to the reality of the circumstances, but it develops its own circumstances. And within that territory of Dimyon, as long as it's operating according to the proper space of Kedusha and Tahara, it creates worlds. It creates a space in which I can encounter HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And Rav Tzadok then is going to split into a very delicate distinction between Yosef HaTzadik and the brothers. Because Yosef HaTzadik was the one with the dreams. Yosef HaTzadik reveals to us how even within dreams there's a kernel of emes, which is the capacity of Dimyon being elevated back up to Chachma to reveal more and more of Chachma by way of Emunah. The brothers themselves, they also understood this capacity, but they wanted to use their dimyon in a different way. They didn't want to get stuck in the external dimyon of Yosef HaTzadik, which was true for a moment, because Yosef is not ultimately going to remain king. Yehuda is going to be king. But the brothers were holding off for a different stage of dimyon to be revealed, which is the secret of emes la'amisa. So in this place, we have to dig down deep into an important hakdama, and I know that there's a lot of hakdamos in this, but we want to get to the end of Os Gimel, that the reality that we can elevate dimyon, which is malchus, which is the lower level of the mind, back into the economy of healthy thinking and emunah, where dimyon can ascend upwards and become the vessel that reveals more and more chachma and reveals more and more biyad hanaviyah madame. That is because ultimately the essential truth of chachma is not fully revealed to us yet. The essential truth of chachma is the emes. That's the true nature of reality. That's how I'm meant to think about the world. That's how I'm meant to process my concepts of God and my concepts of ahavas Hashem and yiras Hashem and eno milvado. That's the emes. But then there's a descent into the sheker of the dimyon, the falsehood of the dimyon, the imagined processes of the dimyon. And the dimyon is real only because it teaches us that that previous level of emes that we thought we had, that previous level of chachma that we thought we had, which was the end-all be-all of chachma, is in truth only the beginning of wisdom. And in truth, according to the true potency of wisdom and illumination that stands at the ready to be revealed, that previous stage of chachma is also just a dimyon. And it's only a preparation towards the next level of clarity that's going to be revealed. And because the emes of Chachma is never the end-all, be-all emes of Chachma, that means that the dimyon itself is the territory that reveals to us the relativity of truth. The fact that there's gradations of truth. Each and every person is going to have their own frequency in which they relate to their koyach hamadama. And each and every person has to understand that the koyach hamadama is the ability to reveal more and more illumination, more and more illumination. Because chachma is an endless thing and it's never been fully revealed, so therefore we can say that the descent down into the territory of falsehood and the descent down into the territory of imagination is only there to enable us to return back upwards with this imagination and to realize that the previous level of chachma that we thought we had grasped and that we thought was whole was in truth nothing, null and void in relationship to the next expression of Chachma that stands at the ready to be revealed. And in that way, we have the ability of healthily integrating imagination back into the frequency of thinking. And with that, we're going to look at the words of Rav Tzadok HaKohen Milublin. And so Rav Tzadok says as follows in Os Zayin of Os Gimel in Machshavos Charetz, that in truth, contemplating Torah, and in truth, awakening the self from its stupor where the imagination was set downwards, is not enough for a person to be victorious in the clarification of their Yetzer Hara and the ascension of Dimyon back up to its rightful place in Chachma. For most people who are Beinanim, for most people who still operate within that space of the Yetzer Tov and the Yetzer Hara in its fluctuation, where the mind is sometimes attached to the body and sometimes it wants to abstract itself from the body. The only way that a person is really going to be able to make it through is by contemplating Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, becoming aware of divine presence, which is the Eitzah of reading Kriyat Shema, which the Torah commands us to do twice a day, each and every day, Pa'amayim B'chol Yom Tamid, each and every person from Klal Yisrael. And this is included within the suggestion of each and every person of how we can overcome the Yetzer Hara. When is the main time that a person has to strengthen their mind with this conception of Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid? When is the best time for a person to reestablish ownership and ba'alus, of being the host of their mind and not being just a guest of the Yetzer Hara? When is the main time to do that? The main time to do that is in the morning, upon awakening. Like Rabbi Nachman says that each and every morning a person has to remember Alma Da'asi, because in the morning there's a freshkeit, as the Chozeh Melublin brings in this week's Parsha from the Rokeach, that in Chasidas Kechasidas B'hatchila, that the essential place of the strengthening of the self and the frequency with which we want to see the day is going to be done upon awakening at the beginning when we set the intention for the day. The main time to scream out Kriyat Shema, this strengthening takes place in the morning. When a person certifies and steadies within themselves the faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu and His unity within their thoughts, each and every moment that we have to establish the faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu's unity like a sturdy pillar that is not going to move throughout the entire day. And then once I do that properly, once I orient myself in that meditative space in the morning, then the rest of the day it's going to be easy for me to overcome the tendency of the body to descend downwards. It's going to be easy for me to bring the imagination down from the body and up to Chachma. And it's going to be easy for me not to just follow whatever it is that my hearts and my eyes want to see. And I'm going to be able to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu throughout the day because I know that I've girded myself for the battle. I've oriented myself. Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid. That means the rest of the day is going to be a reminder. Shavisi, 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 to return back to equanimity, to return back to the Shem Havaya. And any time that I deviate, I'm not going to want to descend down in the natural neural pathways of the mind, which naturally extend down to the body. But I'm very gently going to reorient myself and push back against the all too animalistic desire. And I'm going to attach myself to Emunah. And it's going to be much easier for me to overcome the Yetzer Hara. This is the mitzvah of Kriyat Shema at nighttime, at daytime, immediately upon awakening, setting my intentions for the day. And that's not only in the morning that we're going to have to do this, we're also going to have to end our day this way. Shal Arvis, B'shichbecha, Koidem Hashena, right before a person ends their day, right before a person allows their consciousness to descend down into that space of imagination, we have to strengthen ourselves with this proclamation of faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu to such a degree that even when I'm asleep, even when I'm in that space of imagination that's untethered to the Seichel itself, nevertheless, if I affirm my faith in HaKadosh Baruch Hu prior to bed, then my imagination itself is not going to go down to the body, but it's going to extend upwards and it's going to become the vessel that reveals more and more faith, which is holy dreams and the imagination of each and every yid in its purity. When I daven Kriyat Shema before going to bed, I'm protecting myself against that all too natural rumination of the mind to descend down to the body in a negative way. Because the imaginings that a person has when they're asleep, the demyonos that a person has when they're in a state of slumber, where the active mind is no longer active, is going to be in accordance with the investment of our thought throughout the day. If I spent my day thinking about negative things where my dimyon was rooted in the body, so then naturally my dimyon is going to continue to orient itself towards the body. But if I spend my time affirming imagination's grasp of a chachma of Shavisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, so then my imagination is going to be something that not only does not block out the light of Emunah, but it magnifies the light of Emunah. It becomes the vehicle through which I consistently and constantly redevelop my Emunah. And it's for that reason that Yaakov Avinu, his dreams, he was standing right in front of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, even in his dimyon. When he no longer had his seichel, he was directly face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Why? Because his thoughts were engaged and focused in on godliness when he was awake. And when a person is asleep in their state of slumber, their imagination is reflecting to them what they thought about during the day. That's not always the case, but more generally than not, the imagination and the dreams follow the engravings of thought throughout the day, as Chazal tell us. And that's the mitzvah of reading Kriyat Shema before nighttime. That a person shouldn't lay down and enter into that sleep-like state and be bothered by hirhurim rabim and those hirhurim ra'im and those anxious, inducing ruminations of untethered imagination, but rather a person should strengthen themselves and attach themselves to faith. And by doing this, by going to sleep in the right way, a person will also merit to wake up in the right way and to have their heart already aflamed with love and fear for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it will be easier again to strengthen myself in the morning to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which will enable me to think about HaKadosh Baruch Hu at night ad infinitum. That strengthening myself in the morning enables me to strengthen myself at night, and strengthening myself at night enables me to strengthen myself in the morning. That's why it's pa'amayim b'chol yom tamid, that I only do it twice a day. I reorient myself, I refocus myself on the unity of God twice a day. I think about the affirmation of the goodness at the heart of all things twice a day, and slowly but surely that framing of my day, morning and night, becomes the shape of my thinking mind. And that's why we can say pa'amayim b'chol yom tamid, that if a person does something twice a day, it's as if they're doing it all the time. And this is ultimately the entire purpose of a person in this world, to engage in the burdensome effort of clarifying and purifying our thinking, and not to follow the natural tendencies of the heart and the mind to extend themselves downwards and become stuck in negative thoughts or imaginings that are not real. Right? The Chazon Ish says that there's a single negative character trait which is responsible for all of the eventual symptoms that emerge, and that is haznachas hachayim lezarim hativi, the abandonment of life to the natural proclivity of the self. According to our neural pathways and the influences that we are exposed to, left to our own devices, we must assume that the mind will descend down into the territories of the Yetzer. That's not because we're bad, that's because we live in a world of concealment, and the Yetzer Hara is a very real drive within the self. And therefore, a person has to ensure that they are actively engaged in strengthening their thinking, like Rav Tzadok said, to strengthen the ceiling of the mind, to ensure that it's not going to be inundated with the flow of all of the exposure and the sensual revelations of the outside, but rather to strengthen the ceiling of the ship and to realize that even when the anios, when the ship is shaking in the tumultuous sea, and Yonah ben Amittai goes down to the bottom to Yarkesei Svina, he screams out, and that reveals the Rav HaChoivel, it reveals the captain of the ship that has the ability of stabilizing the ship. We have to yell at the natural tendency to go downwards and strengthen ourselves against our natural judgments. That's the job of each and every person. An am-haaretz is simply a person who does not read Kriyat Shema in the morning or night. The basic prerequisite of being a Jewish individual in this world, in the hopes of harnessing the power of our thinking, is to affirm God's unity in the morning and at nighttime. Meaning, if a person is not thinking whatsoever about unifying their thoughts and their hearts to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, at the very least, in the morning and at night, twice a day, and they allow their minds to be abandoned to the natural proclivity and the hefkerus of the mind to think about whatever it is that ascends upon their spirit, without any attempt to return our mind and to return it back to the rightful place of the heart, that's a person who's an am-haaretz. That's not what the Torah is giving insight to. A person has to enter in with a modicum of effort. That even if a person like that has not done any chait or has not engaged in any transgressive behavior, nevertheless, their minds are attached to the natural proclivity of this worldliness, the gashmias and the emptiness of this world entirely. And there's no chachma in that place. A person who's unwilling to affirm faith in the morning at night to ensure the sturdy boundaries and borders of their thinking, so then that's not a person who has the capacity of being referred to as an Adam. That's someone who's still not yet actualizing what it means to be a ben adam, which is to have das and to have chachma. That means a person is still under the rulership of their nefesh habahamis. The ayidei hachachma hu hisoiris ha'adam letzeis mehadimyon. Because what's chachma? What's chachma? What's the affirmation of Kriyat Shema? What's Shavisi Hashem Negdi Tamid? It's the sparking of the system to detach myself from the rootedness of my imagination that has gotten stuck in all of its addictive tendencies, to uproot the imagination from all of those assumptions and projections and expectations and imagined relief that's going to be found in this world or from that person or from this thing or from that concept, and to untether ourselves from that place of stuckness. That's what Chachma does. The entire purpose of Chachma, says Rav Tzadok in this language, the ayidei ha-chachma hu hisoiris ha'adam letzeitz mehadimyon. The revelation of Chachma, the establishment of the center point of wisdom within the mind, which is through the effort and the labor of thinking and the opposite of the laziness of thought, that's what pulls me out of the destructive form of dimyon. Ki adua, as it's known, there's two hemispheres in the brain, there's two spaces in the brain. There's chachma and there's bina, or what Rav Tzadok is referring to as dimyon. That in truth, there's chachma and there's dimyon. There's chachma and there's bina. Chachma is the illumination of godliness. Bina is the external casing of that grasp of godliness that can get extended down below and get stuck in this worldliness, or it can extend itself up above and it becomes the vessel that reveals the light of Chachma in a hitherto unrevealed way. But if left to its own devices, we remain only in the mindset of Bina, which is Dimyon, which is Madama Milsa Lamilsa, without attaching ourselves to the light of Chachma. So then that Dimyon goes down to the Yetzer Hara. The source of the Yetzer Hara comes from Bina, Dinin Misabrim Minei. But it's only when we abstract that medama in the mind, which is the secret of Bina, and we bring it up to Chachma, only then is the Bina and the Chachma going to be illuminated. That Chachma's job is to bring us out of the Dimyon. As it's known that there are two chadarim in the moach, there are two spaces in the mind. In one territory, on the right brain, there's the koyach ha-chachma, ubesheni koyach ha-medama, and in the left brain, there's the imaginative principle, which is Bina. And when Chachma strengthens itself, the foothold of Dimyon in the wrong way loses its strength and it becomes the handmaiden of Chachma. But if we focus too much on the Dimyon in the wrong way, and we extend the Dimyon downwards to the bodily functions, and we allow the Dimyon to extend itself into whatever thought ascends upon our mind without any resistance whatsoever, so then Chachma itself is going to be weakened. It's Kishazek comes Zenofel. But when the mind of Chachma, when that affirmation of divinity strengthens itself and becomes the captain of the ship, Azu Moishech Koyach HaMedame Imo Lihiyos Gam Kol Dimyonoisav Ritzono Lomer HaHirhurim Sha'oile Me'atzmum Moich Beloy HaAmakas HaMachshav B'Chachma Gam Heim Yehu Rak Lashem Yisbarach. Zok the Heiliger of Tzadok, he says, but when we strengthen the mind of Chachma, and we overcome the natural tendency of descending down in accordance with the imagination, so then imagination ascends upwards and it attaches itself to Chachma. And all of a person's imaginations, meaning to say all of those ruminative thoughts that are not preceded with any intentionality, but rather just the creativity and the deepening of thought that ascends upon the mind when it's contemplating godliness, all of those imaginations are also going to become holy. They become a vessel towards Chachma. And somebody who merits to strengthen the Chachma over and above their Madama, over and above the natural tendency of imagination to go down, to the degree that even their imagination is not going to be considered muvutol, it's not going to be considered something that's just happenstance, it's not going to be considered something that's mabakach. The imagination, when it's upward and when it's raised upwards towards chachma, imagination becomes the vehicle of meaning making. Imagination and those unprepared thoughts that just flow through the mind become more of a representation of ruach hakodesh and nevuah than machshavos betelos. And this is the secret of a Talmid Chacham ha'amiti, the true Talmid Chacham, who has overcome the tendency of going focused on the bina orientation of the madame mind down to the body, and has focused in on chachma and elevated their dimyon to become the vessel of their chachma, to reveal more and more of their chachma. That's the true nature of a Talmid Chacham ha'amiti, where afilu sichasam is Torah, where their mere conversations is Torah. They don't even have to have the intentionality of speaking Torah for their words to be considered as Torah. That's what happens when the imagination is so refined and it becomes the vessel and the garment of the wisdom of the mind that even the imagination itself, the dreams themselves, become filled with significance. That's the job of the tzaddik, to be mezachich, that which appears to be extra, and reveal that not only is it not extra, but it becomes the vessel of revelation. Ki ein etzlam shum davar batal, because in their minds, the dimyon has already been transformed into a vessel that allows chachma not only to reveal itself, but to be magnified and intensified biyad hanaviyah medama, through the secret of the medama of each and every person. But again, everything is going to be in accordance with the fact that each and every person is an Adam. Adam is the language of chashav ma, what's a person thinking? And in accordance with my micro and macro systems of influence is going to be my capacity to elevate my medame back up to my chachma to become the site of more and more revelation. The lowest level, the bare minimum that a person has to do in order to spark the chachma in their mind is kriyat Shema in the morning and at nighttime. This is how a person accomplishes the responsibility of learning Torah. That is the bare minimum of learning Torah, to affirm godly presence in the morning and to affirm godly presence at night. Meaning to say that when a person has the strength of strengthening their wisdom mind, which is the site of true meaning making, and to overcome the tendency of the imagination, if I can do that at least twice a day, when I wake up and before I go to bed, I've already taken myself out of the category or the classification of an am-haaretz and someone who doesn't care. Because the awakening and the hisayrus and the desire, at least twice a day within my mind to be connected to God and to think good thoughts, that has the ability of having an impact on the entire day that my mind shouldn't naturally fall into the natural tendencies of the body. It's enough for me not to be considered an am-haaretz if I think about Hashem, Shvisi Hashem Lenegdi Tamid, in the morning and the night. And this is the responsibility of each and every Jew, the responsibility of each and every person. Each and every person has the responsibility of strengthening themselves in according to what they're capable of, to reach up to the highest levels of Elokus, to refine the dimyon and to bring it back up to Chachma. This is the active principle. It's an obligation upon each and every person, that each and every person is prepared and has the capacity to do this. Not every person has the ability to be a Talmid Chacham. That's something that HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals within a person's mind. But each and every person has the ability of attaching themselves to this refinement of the imagination and elevating imagination back up to Chachma so that it becomes the vessel that reveals more and more Chachma. It's wonderful if God has given a person Chachma. And a person who has Chachma from God has a responsibility of becoming a Talmid Chacham, and to ensure that their mind is perpetually focused in on godliness. But the truth of the matter is, it's going to be in accordance with our human condition. As Rav Tzadok says, everything is based on the fact that a person is a person. And even when a Talmid Chacham stops thinking and stops allowing their mind to be focused in on godliness, it's still okay, because each and every person has to do it in accordance with what they're capable of doing. And when we're capable of strengthening the center of the self in the constructive development of meaningful thoughts, then our imaginations are not going to be stuck down below, but they're going to ascend upwards. V'gam alehu lo yibo, the leaves of the tree, which appear to be external, like the imagination, are not going to be considered empty, but they're also going to become part and parcel of the secret revelation, which is the fact that even the demyonos become divrei Torah. This is the element of the dreams of Yosef HaTzadik. Yosef HaTzadik was referred to as the master of the dreams, meaning to say the person who descended down into the dreamscape of the self, the imaginative frequencies of the self, and by focusing in on Chachma that he received from Yaakov Avinu, by being Doma to Yaakov Avinu, he was able to abstract his dimyon and his chalomos back up to a place of the revelation of the Torah itself. The brothers called him the Baal Chalomos, because they saw Yosef and they said, look at him, he's following his imagination. He's not focusing on Chachma. It appeared to them that Yosef HaTzadik was focusing on the imagination all day long, to the degree that even at nighttime when he was dreaming, all it was based on what he had seen throughout the day. But the truth of the matter is that what the brothers didn't recognize at that time was that the face of Yosef was doime to the face of Yaakov. And doime is very fundamental here. It's the language of imagination. That Yosef Tzadok was a state of a chalom that was like the emes of Yaakov. Yaakov was truth. Yosef was dimyon. But the face of Yosef looked like Yaakov, meaning to say that it's the refinement of imagination when it becomes the vessel of chachma. And because he spent time studying the Torah with Yaakov Avinu, and the Torah is the place of emes, that transformed all of his imaginations and his dreams into a sight of emes, because he was rooted in the chachma. And they weren't considered lies. And ultimately, they reflected themselves in reality. And even though Yosef HaTzadik was still operating in a space of dimyon, even though Yaakov Avinu was operating in a space of dimyon, it was true for him. It was true. He imagined himself as being close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, being like his father Yaakov, and then the imagination is transformed into a sight of revelation. But the thoughts of the Shvatim were also true. The thoughts of the Shvatim who saw Yosef HaTzadik following his dimyonos, they also were not incorrect, because to follow the dimyon without the chachma is dangerous. But the truth of the matter is that yesh be'emes gam kein madrigos. There's many, many levels to the relativity of truth. And Yosef HaTzadik had his own truth in accordance with his dimyon, and the Shvatim had their own truth in accordance with their dimyon, and none of them were considered as wrong, because the dimyon is something that has gradational levels to it. There's hidden sparks of truth hidden within all of this. The only question was whether it was going to extend itself forever. Yosef HaTzadik was focusing on the fact that this is Alma D'Shikra, it's a world of lies, and all I need to do is be like Yaakov Avinu, to imagine the truth, and then that imagination of the truth becomes reflective of the truth, and that was necessary, because Yosef HaTzadik had to go down into Mitzrayim. But the brothers held off. The brothers didn't want to go into that dimyon, because they wanted the emes la'amiso. They wanted the truth of the truth, which is why they didn't follow the pathway of Yosef HaTzadik. Nevertheless, in the end of the day, says Rav Tzadok, all of the Shvatim have the capacity of refining their imagination. That mitzad hadimyon olam hazeh, from the conception of the imagination of this world, even though they appear to be secondary and insignificant, they're also true. They're also part and parcel of Chachma, because the dreams and the imaginings also hold kernels of truth when abstracted back up to Chachma. But that's only when the dimyon becomes the levush of emes. That's only when the dimyon is uprooted from the body and ascended back up to Chachma itself. But all of the Shvatim, the totality of Knesset Yisrael, are all the zera of Yaakov Avinu. The expression of Yaakov Avinu's neshama, which is the emes la'amisa, which is the Chachma. Yaakveni zu pa'amayim. Yaakveni is melashon Chachma. Yaakov has the Chachma of the Torah. That's the emes. If we're able to tap into the shoyresh of Knesset Yisrael, which is Yisrael Saba, which is the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu's emes being revealed through Torah's emes, through Yaakov Avinu, then all of our imagination and all of our expression that is going to descend from that place is also going to be considered refined, and our imagination and our dreams can be considered as the sites of revelation. That all of the souls of Klal Yisrael in each and every generation are ultimately just the extension of Yaakov Avinu. That generation, our generation, each and every generation are like the Shvatim to Yaakov, each and every one of us with our own distortions and our own distinctions and our own separations and the period that appears to be there and the unity that's going to come about. That's all of us connecting to the emes of Yaakov, to the Chachma of Yaakov, which is ultimately why we desired so deeply to be connected to Yaakov, to be rooted in Yaakov, to come to that place of being the Bala Chalomos, and to realize that mitzad ha'emes la'amiso, all of our conceptions are also imaginations, as it's going to be revealed. B'shuv Hashem shivas tzion hayinu kecholmim. It will be revealed that all of our meaning making and all of our attempts in this world and all of our trying to create healthy narratives for ourselves is going to be revealed to be a place of dimyon. And it was trying our best by way of imagination, but because it's attached to Chachma and to Yaakov Avinu, that imagination is going to be true. That even though according to the truth that's going to be revealed in the future, this world is considered only an imaginative world, and it's the world of Alma D'Shikra, and even the truth in this world is not the truth of the truth, and it's impossible to grasp the truth of the truth. The only person who's capable of grasping the truth is a person who has experienced the revelation of Olam Haba in this world, meaning to say that it's Olamecha Tera B'chayecha, that's the level of Yaakov, that they've grasped the true essence of this worldliness, and then they understand how to negate the Yetzer Hara completely, like David HaMelech, who got rid of the Yetzer Hara. That's going to be revealed in the future. But for now, each and every person has to utilize their imagination, biyad haneviyah madama, that each and every person has the ability of reaching these levels of the bittul of the Yetzer Hara, where all of our imaginations become the vessels of the revelation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Because each and every person has the responsibility of understanding, when will my actions reach the actions of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, those levels of emes. And even though each and every person is not achrai to be literally like Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, it's not up to us what the result is going to be. Each and every one of us has the responsibility. That each and every one of us holds within ourselves a kernel of truth in the depth of our soul that's fundamentally connected to Elokim Chayim. And we have to engage in so much effort to get to that place. And even though the arrival is not in the hands of the individual, nor is it within their volitional choice, because it's only HaKadosh Baruch Hu who enables a person to make it all the way, nevertheless, each and every person has a responsibility to say and to yearn to that place of Emes La'amiso. This is the entire essence of the individual, to yearn with all of their heart and all of their soul to come close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In accordance with the greatness of our yearning towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so too HaKadosh Baruch Hu is yearning for us. Kamayim apanim el apanim. That when it appears that we're distant from Hashem, or that Hashem is distancing us, it's because we're considering Hashem distant from us. But in truth, it's rooted in our conception. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is the shade of our hands. In accordance to my understanding of my relationship with Hashem, so too Hashem is going to show himself to me. And we have to elevate our dimyon and imagine ourselves as being face to face with HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And through this yearning towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're going to merit the fulfillment of our yearning and our desire to be close to HaKadosh Baruch Hu according to our levels. And that's the help that HaKadosh Baruch Hu offers us. That's the purpose of creation, for us to elevate all of our dimyon back up to Chachma and to taste that light of Olamecha Tira B'chayecha, to see Eino Nulvado Mamish. This is the purpose of the creation of the world. Yisrael Asher B'cha aspire, that we have the zera of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov in us. We have a preconditioned nature of faith that exists within each and every one of us, that has the ability to encounter the emes la'amisa, which is the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, which is the ability to reach to the levels of our forefathers, Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, which means to be a Jew, to operate with that place of the yichud of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and to live with that light of Yisrael Asher B'cha aspire. Hashem wants our dimyon. Hashem wants us to elevate our dimyon, elevate our dreams back up to Him, to transform the territory of the animalistic desire that can get so easily rooted in this world, and to elevate it upwards, to come to realize that there's no part of the self that's extra. There's no thought that flows through the mind that's not fundamentally open and opportune to reveal the fundamental light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Biyad haneviyah madama. When I begin to live my life like this, then all of the things that a person experiences, all of the thoughts that cross the threshold of a person's mind, is an opportunity to uncover more and more the light of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, more and more Emunah. And with this, we end Os Gimel. And Be'ezras Hashem, now Rav Tzadok is going to take us into a place which is only the next logical conclusion, which is he's going to bring us into Purim. Purim as the last Yontif, Purim as the revelation of Klal Yisrael's ability to overcome Amalek and doubt, is only going to be revealed through the refinement of imagination. Imagination is the hidden ingredient necessary to overcome all of the darkness of this world, and not only to overcome it, but to transform the darkness of this world into light, to reveal within the vessels themselves that there's a light, to reveal the moichan of Reishad Lo Asyada, which is the dimyon ha'amiti, which is the dream and the nevuah of being connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu at each and every moment. And Be'ezras Hashem, we should be zochah to drink from the well of the Kohen Gadol, to have mayim that are mataher us, and to bring us to a place of hishtokukus amiti, to refine the imagination, to elevate it back up from the all-too-human condition of the darkness of this world, and to imagine HaKadosh Baruch Hu's light, to imagine the goodness, to imagine more and more good, to imagine Od Yoter Tov, Be'ezras Hashem.